Are you preparing for the MSRA exam, or have you taken the exam and you're considering retaking the exam? Then one of the challenges that you might have encountered or will encounter will be, what materials exactly should I use in preparing for this exam in order to have good scores? So in this video today, I'm going to be sharing with you best materials to prepare for the MSRA exam. So if this is something that interests you, then you want to come along with me to the end of this video. Hello, my name is Blessing and I'm a doctor person in the UK. And here on this channel, I share tips for IMG doctors and my journey as a doctor here in the UK. So feel free to become a part of the community. If you're a new person, I want to say you're welcome. And if you have been following, thank you so much for your support so far. Yes, you are the reason why this channel is still running. And I also want to use this opportunity to solicit more for your support. Yes, that like, that share, that comment does make a whole lot of difference. So feel free to subscribe if you find any of these videos helpful to you. Okay, so let's just get right into the discourse of today. Okay, so to start with, one of the very common mistakes that people sometimes make with the MSRA exam is that they think, oh, MSRA exam is just another exams, and exams are just about getting as much information as you can. And as much as I want to agree with that, the only problem with this idea is that every exam has its own design or tactics. So you cannot prepare for every exam the same way. So I think the first thing that anyone needs to understand is, what exactly is this MSRA exam? How should I prepare for it? What is required of me? And being able to answer all of these questions will help you to know how to go about preparing for this exam. Because the truth about the MSRA exam is that it is not just about reading and just accumulating information. It is very important to do strategic studying in order to be able to have really good scores. The exam is divided into two sections, which is the clinical questions and the situational judgment test. Now, I know a lot of people tend to struggle with the situational judgment test, and maybe the clinical is much more easier because we are all doctors and we have been doing a lot of exams before getting to this stage of sitting for the MSRA. So yes, we probably have a lot of information already, but then I'm going to be addressing the preparation in two ways. So just like I said before, the MSRA exam is one that requires you to prepare, strategically, intentionally. It's not just to keep reading and keep accumulating information. And so one tool that is very important in order to achieve this aim is to use question banks. And I know that there are so many question banks. However, I'm just going to be emphasizing on the ones that I used and that some other colleagues, even those who sat for the exam recently, found helpful. So the first material I want to talk about is past medicine. So I did not use past medicine, but from the information I gathered, that it's actually quite good, especially for the clinical aspect of the exam. Those who used it said that it gave good answers to the questions. The explanations were quite concise and clear, and they provided enough information about the question, so such that it was really helpful, especially for the clinical aspect of the exam. Now, the second material is the e-medical MCQ banks. I used that, and truly, I think I want to start with the fact that there was a lot of questions. We had so many questions, and for the clinical aspect of the exam, it simulated clinical, like the clinical scenarios were quite clear, and it was like exam standard kind of questions. So it was really good as a preparation tool. The third material is the Samson's question bank. I also use the Samson's question bank, and I think this was very good because it was quite helpful. Although sometimes it doesn't give a lot of details about the answers, but it's able to provide the answer, and sometimes it does give explanation as to why this is the answer, mainly for the clinical aspect of the exams. Now, for these three materials, the challenge is with the situational judgment test. Now, the reason why I said is a challenge is because if you're somebody who practices with all of this material, you could sometimes find some questions having different answers, and that would be quite challenging. So that's why I suggest that for the situational judgment test, one very tool that will be helpful is the Oxford Handbook and the Good Medical Practice. Now, the situational judgment test is a test of what will you do as a doctor in certain scenarios, and this is just to test your competency of how much knowledge you have about the good medical practice, the GMC's good medical practice, how you should behave as a doctor in the UK, what is expected of you as a doctor in the UK. So if you're able to go through the GMC's good medical practice very well, it can be very helpful, especially if you are a doctor outside of the UK. Now, the other one is the Oxford Handbook. So the Oxford Handbook, more like the questions are exam standards, and they are able to clearly explain why they chose the answer or why they ranked the question in certain ways. I used the Oxford Handbook and it was really quite helpful for me. And also it has a lot of practice questions and the answers to these questions at the back of it. So it was a really helpful tool, although I didn't have the opportunity to use it and practice all of the questions because I got to know about it towards the end of, like, very close to the exam. So I just did as much as I could. So I think the Oxford Handbook will be a very useful material for anyone who wants to do well in the situational judgment aspect of the exams. Now, some other materials that some persons have found useful is the UK Foundation Program past questions. There are some questions that are on the Oriel website too. Some persons also practice this question, and the reason I just advise you practice is just to give you an idea of the kind of questions. Now, having said all of this, there might be some other materials that could also be helpful, but these are the ones that I used and so many other persons that I know have used. There might be some other helpful materials, and so you could leave them in the comment section if you have written this exam, if you start for the exam and you have used some materials that I have not mentioned here that were really helpful to you. Please feel free to share in the comment section to help anyone who might be preparing for this exam. Now, I think at this point I just need to call your attention to a few things about the exam, which is that your practice or question bank questions, the questions from the various question banks, number one, may not look like what you will see in the exam, especially the SJT section. So a lot of people after the exam usually come out and they're like, oh my god, that SJT was quite a thing. Like, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. It was so difficult to rank them. Everything is looking like the same. I got so confused. I don't even know which should be. Now, compared to the practice material, in the practice materials, you can clearly know that, oh, this is the worst answer, and then you want to rank it as the last. Oh, this is the best reaction, or the best answer, or the best way a doctor should have responded in this situation, and you want to rank it top, and then you shuffle the other three in between the best and worst options. However, in the exam, it can actually be complicated such that you don't even know which is the best and which is the worst, because sometimes the difference in all of them is just more like sometimes maybe some grammatical differences. And so if you're not like a British person, you might actually struggle with the exam. So what I'm trying to say is that the SJT aspect of the exam is quite challenging, and that is why I advise that although the question banks might sometimes provide you with controversial answers, you know, answers that all of them might be saying, like, the different question banks might be giving different answers, I will still advise that you go through as many SJT questions as is available or as is possible in your question banks, in all of these question banks. Practice them, practice the Oxford SJT handbook, and also go through your good medical practice. Now, another thing is that for a lot of people who have had very high scores in the exam, one thing that you can find that is common to a lot of them is that they used multiple materials. So if you're like a doctor in the UK and you can afford to get all of these materials, some of them are quite expensive, but if you can get some of these materials, that is good. Then please prepare with all of this material. Ensure you go over them again and again. But if peradventure you're an IMG outside of the UK and purchasing these materials are kind of expensive for you, the one thing that will be very helpful to you is to join a discussion group, because that solves that problem. Now, in a discussion group, different people have different materials, and so if you are in a discussion group, somebody might have a material you don't have, but then being in that group gives you access to the questions in that material. So I think that this is one of the things you can actually do. Find a discussion group, and if possible, everyone in the discussion group get different materials, and that way it gives all of you access to all of the various materials that are available. The GMC's good medical practice, you don't need to buy that from anywhere. You can get that online. And so even for the SJT Oxford Handbook, I think you might be able to get them from some Telegram groups, and in the worst case scenario, maybe you might have to purchase it on Amazon. But So I think these are the things that might be very helpful to you. Now, if peradventure you're very busy and you don't have the chance to go through various materials, I would say pick one, stick to that one, make sure you go over them over and over, or at least pick two, maybe past medicine and Samson's question bank, or maybe e-medical and Samson's question bank, and then all the other ones, the Oxford Handbook, and then the Good Medical Practice. But if you cannot purchase everything, ensure you have access to as many practice questions as possible, because the MSRA exam is all about practicing and practicing. Like, practice as many questions as possible from these question banks, because they may not look exactly like what you will see in the example. If you go through this question bank, it will prepare you very well for the exams. And so when you get there, you're not going to be shocked, because you will definitely find that you are ready for the exam. So I think this is some of the information that I have in order to prepare for this exam. So feel free to ask your questions if you have any questions, and if there's anything that worked for you, or anything extra that you did, or that you feel could give more information to whoever is sitting for these exams, please feel free to drop them in the comment section and help somebody preparing for the exam. So till I see you again, take care. Bye.